Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we're shaping workforce behaviors. Today, I am joined by special guest Greg Weinger, who is an expert in introversion and leadership. It's a topic that we haven't necessarily explored all that much on the Talent Forge, but it is something that we need to take a look at and dive deep. So, welcome to the show, Greg.
Yeah, great to be here, Jay. Thanks.
Greg, talk to us about how did you get into this space of introversion, leadership? What is your story, and how did you land here?
Well, I was kind of born into it. As I came to find out, I'm born an introvert, and as I've learned, that's something that you're kind of hardwired for. And I kind of came about it, kind of resisting it for most of my career. I am in leadership. I'm in tech. I started out programming computers. As kind of a something that was suited to my personality, originally, but I just wanted to have more of an impact. And so I realized, okay, I really want to do this leadership thing. And so I started talking to managers and I found I wasn't encouraged. And I was like, okay, well, it was kind of a setback, and I'm high achiever. I was high school valedictorian, went to big name school and all this stuff. But my whole focus was if you can study hard enough, then you can do it. And so I realized, okay, so the exam is being an extrovert now, as a leader, like a big, loud, outgoing leader who's kind of taking up all the space in the room. And it's like, oh, I can study for this, I can nail this. And so I did that, and I was really trying to fit that bill for a long time. But what happened is, that really wasn't authentic for me. And I gradually developed my own ways of leadership, my own personal brand of that. And, I was going at this a long time. I was really tested when I was and became a senior leader on an executive team, reporting to CEOs, working with, I was starting out on the technical side. Now I'm working with sales leaders and marketing leaders and everyone, there's bigger and bigger personality. And, in these rooms, it's almost like a competition to eat up all the oxygen in the room. And so it's hard to, that was super challenging for me. But doing personal work and realizing I finally deeply understood how I was, where I was coming from, in part by finding some really good books on the subject, which I could recommend. And I came out on the other side with my own toolkit, and I really am embracing my style. And I realized I just wanted to, amplify the message, amplify the material that's already out there, so that more people who are like me, who are, trying so hard for so long to be extroverts, be someone who they're not, to embrace their strengths and be themselves.
Okay, Greg, I love this because I cannot tell you how many people who would be probably classified in the introversion, if not self-diagnosed introversion, if not taken the tests and learned of their introversion, that have told me I'm not a leader. And that was literally based on the idea of taking up the space in a room, being the first to speak, being the most outgoing, etc., and watching them develop and turn into some of the most effective leaders I've ever seen. And I have two business partners, both vice presidents who are both introverted, who are
Mhm.
two of the best leaders I've ever. I'm the person that takes up the oxygen in a room. We'll get to my story in a minute, but with that being said, I want to zone in on something that you mentioned. You said that there was a resistance. Like there was this resistance that you didn't want to be the introvert or you didn't want to align with that originally. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I think that's something that a lot of people feel like, oh, I can't be an introvert. And they may have some of that pushback against it. What did that feel like? What did that look like? And how did you maybe take that first step away from there?
Yeah, I mean, you really nailed what that is. It's an idea. It's a bad idea. It's a wrong idea. It's this idea that if you are an introvert, if you're quieter by nature, that you can't be a leader. It's wrong. It's false. I mean, you look at some of the most prominent examples, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. I can't touch on political examples. Abraham Lincoln, I go like 100 plus years ago, like a very famous introvert.
Very
But
safe.
yeah, try and be safe here. I'm sure I offended somebody. Um, but but how does it feel? It feels bad. It feels like, okay, well, there's something I want to do and I can't. It's super discouraging. And then, but I also was aware simultaneously is that no, that's wrong. Like there's something in me also knew that this was wrong. And so it was sort of an internal tension. Like I would go so far as to take those tests and intentionally give the extroverted answer on the test because, they're in my workplace, and I'm a good test taker. So I know how to ace a
Game the
test. And so
system, yeah.
I was like, yes, I'm an extrovert. I was like kind of fooling myself. I just don't want anybody to know. But it's just wrong. And so what eventually I sort of, like with enough success, I sort of felt validated in that direction. And it's like, okay, I'm developing my own style. And you're talking about like people like this. It's half the population on introversion tests on Myers-Briggs. It's 50-50 of people who are on one side or the other. Now there are degrees of it,
Hmm.
and but you what ends up happening is people are saying, well, I'm in the middle, so I'm okay. And the quiet part is it's so I'm okay. Like it's okay to be quiet. And all of these sentiments are based on myths and misconceptions about introverts. That you don't like people, that it means you can't be a leader, that you can't have impact, that you're shy. I mean, shy is another big myth because introversion and shyness they're different concepts. Like
Yep.
you can be a non-shy introvert. Like you'd be super extroverted. You expend lots of energy in front of crowds and all these things. Have no fear about those things. But like after your allotment of time, you're burnt out, you're fried, you got to go recharge. That's the introversion. That's has decoupled from shyness. Although there's often overlap, and I kind of have aspects of both. Um, so that's kind of my my initial journey out of that.
And I think that's so important. And I kind of relate it back to something I experienced in like third grade. I was told, Jay, mathematics is probably not your thing. And I believed that. Like for some reason, that stuck with me all the way through college. I ended up like deferring graduating my undergraduate because I was afraid to take the math proficiency exam. And at some point in time, when I took the exam finally and I passed four levels above where I was supposed to, and I realized I was doing probability and statistics as a methodological, behavioral researcher. Uh, I kind of started to shed that idea that maybe I'm not bad at mathematics. And it sounds
Mhm.
to me like maybe that's the first step for those that are in that introversion space that have felt that before, have felt like, well, I'm not a leader. I can't step up. I can't be outspoken. Or maybe it is, I'm feeling too shy. Maybe challenging that label to start off with is a great place to start, because it sounds to me like when you stepped into your voice, into your authenticity, then maybe it made it a little easier for you to start navigating. Is that what I'm getting from you, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've mentored lots of introverts in my career now, and many of us follow a similar path where there is some shyness and there is apprehension. And shyness, we were talking about anxiety. Anxiety is 100% something that can be overcome. And the pathway is just gradual change. And, it might start out like you might be overwhelmed in talking in a small group. And so you push yourself a little bit. The next time there's an opportunity, you encourage yourself to say something, and then it's in front of a larger group and a larger group, and then a group with big people, stakeholders, people, important people, and then there's an audience, and all these are stair steps on a way to gaining comfort. And I have on my own podcast, I've talked to 50 people, and you know, 98% of them are introverts, and most of them started out in exactly the same place, feeling shy. And the majority of them are speaking in front of audiences of 1,000 people, or they're on these various platforms. So all of those things are possible. It's a little bit of a long game in that respect. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I think is really uh, critical to all of this is there has to be some kind of compelling sense of purpose, because for someone who is shy, who is uncomfortable speaking up, there's you need some kind of motivation, that because you're going to have to be uncomfortable. You have to intentionally go into the discomfort, embrace the discomfort in the name of growth. And you're really only going to do that if there's a compelling need that you see and a reason. And most of us, if we find that, it's more than enough. Like to be able to help people, to be able to change the situation, to be able to grow a business, grow a career, support your family, like you name it, it helps help people in society, whatever it is for you. That's, we get caught in our internal feelings. It's me, or like, oh, I'm broken or defensive. There's a lot of really vulnerable feelings that you feel bad, and we all feel them. That this is what we all feel. But sort of the jujitsu move for quiet people, probably everybody, but is to turn the spotlight. Flip it 180 degrees, focus it on the person out there that you would like to help. So it's not about you anymore. And these are things that have been helpful for a lot of people that I've talked to.
Such great tactics there. And, I think about this in terms of what you just said. I think is so powerful, that sense of purpose or need. It often drives courage, right? Like
Mhm.
even in so many other things where, like if I'm hungry, I may have the courage to do some things that I am not going to do if I wasn't starving or anything else. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think about that. I do a lot of like wilderness survival trips, and I think about the courage I have when I start getting hungry. So it's almost like that
Mhm.
need drives whatever kind of actions. I really like that sense of purpose there. So, Greg, let's talk about shyness, because and as I shared with you before, most people would look at me as an extrovert. They would think that I am 100% at the extroverted scale. I'm on stages. They've seen me in a leadership capacity, a boardroom. I speak up. I usually act first. Sometimes I can be that leader that fills too much of the space. I've learned that, and I've learned to take a step back from it. With that being said, no one would probably immediately classify me as shy for sure, and I don't feel shy.
Mhm.
Uh, but no one would really classify me as an introvert. But as I mentioned, once I get off the stage, once I'm done speaking or anything else, I have to retreat back to my cabin in the woods, nature, whatever it is, and really kind of center myself, bring myself back to like an energy level, an energy space where I can engage again. And it took me a long time to actually accept the idea of like maybe I'm not as extroverted as people think I am, or even that I've labeled myself, that I'm probably more towards this center. So let's do a little myth busting here. You mentioned a couple
Mhm.
of them that, introverts are shy, or, that they feel like they can't step into leadership, etc. But what is it about introversion? If you were to say, hey, this is probably a good indicator that you've got some introverted tendencies or that you could embrace those tendencies. How would you help maybe a young Jay Johnson who thought that they were supposed to be that extrovert, maybe see a little bit of that in themselves?
Yeah, the classic definition, introversion versus extroversion, is where does your energy go, like initially? So, as you can imagine, introvert, it goes inward. The first instinct is to think, to feel, to kind of go internal, in order to understand a situation wherever you are. And then, I think of kids at kindergarten on the first day of school. Like the first kid runs up, sees the chaos, and like runs right into the middle of it. And the second kid comes up, and then they sit, and they're looking at all the stuff around, what's up on the walls, and they're looking at the kids and all this stuff, and then choosing where do they want to participate. And when they're ready, they kind of go into it. So that kind of gives you the feel of it. And so that manifests in different ways. So people who are more introverted do fantastic in one-on-one conversations, like like this. Introverts are great on podcasts. Like one-on-one conversations were great. Small groups, great. You start to experience some challenges with larger groups. With there's a lot more going on, and the reason is because so much is processed internally and really deeply. So instead of just kind of understanding not just what people are saying, but maybe the moods, the facial expressions, all the stuff of three people, something our brains can handle. 12 people suddenly we're trying to do too much. It's that the tendency, and it's so. What I have found is, in these larger groups, as I'm taking things in and doing this internal processing, the conversation has kind of moved on by the time I'm like, oh, have something to contribute. And so I think that's one really common experience that introverts would have.
So from that, and let's dig into that because it's so funny that you say that. There is a number of times that even some of my VPs, as I mentioned, who are highly introverted, are like, "Oh, I was going to say this during this, but it seemed like we moved on." Do you have a suggestion? If you're that introvert that has the idea that wants to share it, conversation starts to move on. Like for me, I think about that and all of the ideas lost, all of the great comments that could have come, or anything else. Maybe let's start with if you're the introvert that has that idea, should I maybe bring it up later? Should I speak it out? Should I write it down and bring it to the forefront? And then I'm going to ask you if you're the extroverted leader in the room, because I know that we're going to have some extroverts listening to this. How do I help that introvert draw that out?
Yeah, these are great questions. So depends on the situation, but I think we often think it's too late, and it's not. So there you have a couple options. The first one, yeah, write it down, but then, you know, you could raise your hand and say, look, I know I want to go back to this topic we were talking about over there because I think this is really a really important point. Or if you feel like, okay, that moment is truly past, maybe it's a follow-up email or a Slack message. And by the way, I did some more thinking on this, and I just had this one point. I think it's important. I just wanted to share it, something like that. So your influence, your leadership doesn't end in that moment. There are very few instances where like you can't go back and
Right.
revisit something. So it's a judgment call there. Um, and you said extroverted leader. I mean, yes, extroverted leader, but I would just expand that to all leaders. All leaders should be thinking about, okay, if this is true. This is 50% of people, and are on the quieter side, and we all know, thinking on in the room, who you know is always going to be talking, you're always going to hear from, and who are you not going to hear from. Well, everyone in that room is there for a reason. You've hired them, you count on them, you want the best out of everyone in that room. So it's incumbent on you as a leader to create the space, knowing that people process information differently, they speak up differently, and like, these other people are just as smart, have just as many ideas to contribute, and you're not getting them if you're not creating the space for it. So how do you do that? Prep, it's preparation. You sending the agenda in advance, giving people who are quieter time to contribute and participate, and bring some of their thinking to the meeting. It's not always possible. There are topics, there are things in the moment. So then you can actually create more space in the meeting and say, like, oh, we've been talking about this for a while. What does Jay think? Jay, what do you think? And like, you might, and then that's where, again, introverts can participate in this and say, look, I'm still thinking this through. Do you mind if I send a follow-up email? Or, give me a few more minutes. I'm still kind of thinking about this, something like that. And um, they can further help, so that technique there for an introvert is called sharing what's going on in your brain. Because people don't know when you're doing a lot of thinking, you're people aren't there with you. And so another common experience for someone who's more internal, introverts, they're not verbalizing all, live for everyone to watch their thought process. They'll be, well, here's the solution. And everyone's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what are you talking about? And you're
Mhm.
like, well, you hadn't walked them through step A, B, C, and D to show how you got to that conclusion. So you have to share, okay, this means that, and that means that, and we've noticed these things, and that's why I'm thinking this. And people are like, oh yeah, you have to bring them along. And so that's another common pitfall for introverts.
Now, and I love that because the creating space has definitely been something I've tried to adopt into meetings. Like, I will literally say, "Hey, I'm going to create a little bit of space here for everybody to think, ponder, and I'd love to hear from everybody in the group where what temperature it is, or what the temperature on this decision is." And sometimes I think that temperature check has been a saving grace because maybe they haven't gone all the way through but they're at least going to be comfortable enough to say, well, I'm probably a 2 out of 5 at this moment. That gives me the ability to say, okay, well, talk me through that. What does the two feel like to you or look at? Because one of the things that I realized that I was doing was I was probably a little bit too direct in okay, Greg, tell me what you're thinking right now. Okay, Mark, tell me what you're thinking right now. And it was just like this, I'm not prepared to speak. So
Right,
that the
right.
temperature check really kind of played a little bit better. Like, what are you feeling? Where are you at?
Mhm.
So, Greg, let me ask this question. And I think that, obviously we've kind of talked a little bit about that sort of internal, should I speak, should I not speak? Let's get to the should I lead or should I not lead? Because I think that that is I I really honestly think that the world is better with introverted leaders. It's just true. If it was all extroverted leaders, I think that there would be a lot less space for ideas, thoughts, and sort of some of that deep thinking. How can we, as leaders, managers, HR representatives, how can we inspire maybe a little bit of that confidence? How can we encourage in a meaningful way that doesn't put an introverted, somebody who's feeling, that introversion sort of like resistance? How do we encourage, inspire, and engage people to step into their introverted leadership?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that everybody is on some step on that path. I was talking about there's a ladder up where, at some point you're going to be comfortable speaking in the boardroom, like you're going to be comfortable holding the space and, like getting the person who's stepping on your toes to back down and holding space, staying calm, and then still being your introverted self, or speaking in front of 1,000 people, something like that. So these are things that might seem impossible or just extremely daunting, and those were for me. Each of those things were very daunting for me. I would spend nights awake, sweating in the bed, thinking about, okay, I have to speak tomorrow in front of the CEO and this other thing. And those are with experience and proving yourself and just proving to yourself that, oh, these are just people, these are just situations, and tools to manage anxiety. There's lots of things that you can do, but that's a long path.
Mhm.
And so when you're talking to someone who's early on in that path, part of it is just having that certainty and the knowledge that, like, you've shown flashes of this or that, you have really important things to say. You're super thoughtful. So it's really about encouragement. Did you realize that you can do this also? Like, that this could be something that you can do. And it's just like opening their mind to that, or pointing them to resources, and, like, oh, you remind me of so and so, when
I
they
love
do
that.
that, or and also, like, especially if you are a person like that, that you can offer your experience. But if not, you could encourage someone to find a mentor who is more like that, who has followed more of that path. And so those are some things that I've done, or that I've had colleagues say, like, oh, you should talk to Greg about this, like he's may have gone through certain similar things.
I love that. And it actually reminded me sort of the pathway of growth for one of my VPs. Her name's Stephanie, and I'm going to give her a ton of credit. we were part of an organization together. And I mean, the first time that she introduced herself, it was, "Hi, my name's Stephanie." And that was it, and sat down.
Mhm.
And, big anxiety about public speaking and just kind of speaking in a group. And over the course of time, and I saw this, it was incremental. She got more comfortable introducing herself, got more comfortable with the group, took on a secretary position the following year on the board because there was no speech, took on a associate position because there was no speech, and then finally somebody had said, well, why don't you take on a VP position? And it was a 1 minute speech that she had to give, and she was like, I can do that. But I saw this incremental until she became president, until she served on a state board, and now she's the vice president of all of branding and everything. But it was this incremental process of sort of like I dipped my, it was almost the hokey pokey, right? Right hand
Yeah.
in, right hand out. And then until all of a sudden there was this comfortability. And I would still not say that there's, and maybe let's, because I want to dig into this, because I bet you that there are some introverts out there that are like, I've put my hand in, I've put my hand out, and I'm still not comfortable giving a speech in public. I'm
Hmm.
still not
Hmm.
comfortable stepping up. How do you continue to encourage maybe somebody that has felt like they've stepped out there or anything else, but they don't feel like they're comfortable or they haven't completely gotten rid of the anxiety of speaking in public? Because I think sometimes we just want, hey, one day this will just go away, and it's probably not going to happen. So, how do you encourage them to keep going?
Yeah, well, that hasn't completely gone away for me either. I think there definitely is this view like, I am not a leader because I still feel some anxiety. That's it's a terrible idea. It's just wrong, flat wrong idea. Like I guarantee you when, the anytime someone goes on stage, like there's entertainers, there's been very introverted entertainers, people who deal with some level of fear. I mean, I go back to, physiologically, you can't distinguish, the body can't distinguish between excitement and fear. So one of the tricks I've heard people say, is like, well, I'm just very excited. Um, the other part that, where I've personally come to is just like, oh, hello, fear. There's fear here. This is coming up, and it's my body's reaction. And I know from doing this so many times, like, all right, this is what happens at this point, and I'm going to start talking, and I'm going to do it, and people are going to laugh, and it's going to go on, and it's going to be great. And I don't get to the good stuff unless I get over that hump there around the fear. But it always does diminish. It always gets smaller. But I would just say don't expect it to go away.
Yeah. And I like how you said that, hello, fear, almost making it like this is the co-pilot. This is part of the person that's going to jump on the bus, be on the journey with me. And it's
Hmm.
okay. I'm just going to let them stay in the passenger seat and I'm going to kind of keep driving. So,
Yeah.
what a neat way to frame that. And I do agree physiologically, just from the behavioral science side, sweaty palms, heart rate elevated, different fluctuations in skin and breathing, etc. That can be excitement and it can be anxiety. And the reality is the body does experience those things in very similar ways. So I'm loving how this is shaping how we might be able to engage, how we might be able to engage if we are feeling some of those introverted things. Let's go back because I think it is one of those things that's super important. What should a good leader be looking for? And what do I mean by this is none of us wear like a scarlet E extroverted or I introverted. How should a leader be thinking about their teams, their space? What should a leader be looking for in order to make sure that I'm creating the conditions of space, of comfortability, and for people to step into their authenticity?
Yeah. I just one note, and one of the things that you want as a leader is you want diversity in general, diversity of thought, diversity of personalities, styles, diversity of perspectives, because through that richness you get variety, and it's diversity makes healthier. I mean, just biologically, as you must know, yeah, like the more diversity of in a gene pool and that, you just, it creates a healthier organism. And so you want that for your team. And so you're selecting for that. And so what we're talking about now is about, then how do you make sure that you're creating that space? And I think it's planning ahead. I think it's, in your one-on-ones with people, understanding where they're coming from. Are they comfortable contributing? Do they feel like they're contributing, the most they could? Can you start, I think a lot of introverts haven't received the instruction manual yet, and so they may not realize that, okay, I'm trying to match this ideal and beyond, come up with my best ideas on the spot, instead of honoring where they're going to make the best contributions. Maybe it's when they take a beat or they create some time or space for themselves. So it's encouraging people to self-manage, to get the best out of themselves that they can, and bring the best of themselves to work. And then I think it's when there are meetings, when there are deadlines and projects, um, and meetings, are you giving people the time to prepare and the space in the meetings um, to make those contributions? And I just want to say that, as attuned to this as I am, I have found myself doing the same exact thing and taking up too much space in those meetings. It's just, I think it's a temptation of the role, or you get on a roll and you forget, you get distracted and you don't remember, okay, have I heard from everybody here? Like, have I created this space for everybody here? So anyone is susceptible to that. It's an intentional act as a leader to make sure that you're still doing that.
I love that. So taking a step back, pausing, and just asking ourselves, are we creating space? Often can be the way for us to create space or to kind of re-engage. Greg, you had mentioned that there were some books that were inspirational
Oh,
for you on your journey. Is there any particular one or two or three that you would love to share? Because I want those introverts out there to step in. And I know sometimes research and me search is a really powerful vehicle for that.
yeah. Well, I've heard time and time again. This was the one that did this for me. So it's Quiet by Susan Cain. The subtitle is great. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. So
Ooh,
this
I
is the
love
book.
that.
Um,
Okay.
so many of the people I've interviewed on my podcast have said that reading this book was a sea change in their life.
Hmm.
It gave them a feeling of understanding, acceptance. There are a number of ideas. There's one in particular I didn't touch on. It is super critical for me, and just in my mental makeup here, is that introvert our attitudes toward introversion are cultural. They're culturally based, and even in the United States, you go back to the 1800s, we did not value extroverts over introverts. It was sort of like we were an agrarian society, small towns, and the quiet, upstanding citizen was the ideal. It only really shifted in the Industrial Revolution. You go
Hmm.
to Japan, Asia, this is flipped on its head.
Yeah.
The person who's out, speaking their mind and running at the mouth is considered a fool, and the
Yeah.
quiet one is wise. Like, how do we know he's wise? He hasn't said anything, but like it's but that's the cultural idea.
Yeah.
So I mean, could come from anywhere, but it's like we just are out of balance with where we're looking for it.
Love that. Well, and it is fascinating to me. You'd mentioned that because I've seen different organizations where the culture really drove sort of the idea of whether or not quiet or whether, sort of like boisterous, loud, outgoing extroversion was the preferred norm. So I think that there's a lesson there in and of itself for every one of you leaders out there is what culture are you creating? What are you rewarding? Are you rewarding or creating the conditions for quiet wisdom, reflection, which I think is one of the most important things for leaders to do. And we can't do that unless we actually quiet ourselves or quiet our mind, and listening, all of which, can be really powerful behaviors within a culture. Awesome. Is there any other books that you would share, Greg?
I would just say just seek out that one just to start with and go from there. I haven't written my books yet, so I can't plug that.
We'll be
But I do
watching
have my
for that.
podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to ask you about your podcast. We'll be watching for that book to come out, Greg, and when it does,
Okay.
I'm definitely going to invite you back. You've
All
got a
right.
podcast that is focused for introverts and leaders. Can you just tell our audience a little bit about that? I always love sharing powerful podcasts that help the audience in whatever journey that they're on. So, talk a little bit about that, and maybe how might the audience get in touch with you if they wanted to reach out?
Yeah, it's called the Powerful Introvert Podcast. And the name came to me of a colleague, used that to describe me, and I was like, oh, I like that. Um, but it's intended like kind of like I described before. It's what would I have wanted to know kind of entering in on my leadership journey. And so it's lessons, it's resources, I speak to coaches, communications experts, authors, academics, people who are just interested in writing about the subject. Powerful introverts in themselves. I had a six-time boxing champion come in. He was an introvert.
Wow.
Yeah, he's fantastic. That episode is coming out this week. But I speak to wonderful people, and I personally find it very inspiring to see people who are introverted and going out and doing amazing things. So yeah, it's everywhere you find podcasts: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and yeah, just if you search for "powerful introvert," you'll find it.
We'll get the links out on that. And are you active on LinkedIn, Greg?
I am, yeah. So I am too. So that is, yeah, Gregory Weinger on LinkedIn. Um, Happy to hear from you.
Excellent. So we'll get that in the show notes too. Greg, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This is a topic I think is so important. As you mentioned, 50% of the population. And, it's one of those things where I think there are so many ideas and opportunities that are lost because space is not created for introverts to bring their authentic self and the psychological safety needed for them to bring their authentic self to work. So I think that this is a timely and exceptionally important topic, and really appreciate the insights and wisdom that you brought to the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the excellent work you're doing here, Jay. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Greg. And thank you, audience, for tuning into this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping workforce behaviors.